No,
So
no,
did you
please
go through
turn on your video. Please.
Yes. Okay, just give me. Just the coffee machine is working. So
What's that got to do with your video?
okay.
Like building up the suspense.
Welcome to the madhouse, Jeff.
Building up the suspense.
We don't want to give the impression we're professional, okay? There's absolutely nothing professional going on here. Ville.
There we go.
Yes. There we go.
All right. So all set.
You have the coffee. You have the coffee.
I do.
Okay,
So you need to explain to us here why it was that you couldn't turn on the camera because you were getting coffee.
Because you would have just looked at an empty room, right? So why would I turn on the video before I'm here?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yes, I can see the benefit of seeing you rather than an empty room. Some people might disagree.
Touche.
Yes, exactly.
All right, good. Are we ready to go?
I think
Ready
so.
on this end.
All right, good. So here we go.
Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Krogdahl and Ville Sointu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Daydreaming. I'm here in Finland for a change. As you probably know that I've been traveling a lot lately, but this time around I'm here in my home studio. Call it the studio if you want, or a living room, whatever you prefer. But nonetheless, we are here with another guest, of course, which we're going to introduce in just a moment. But before I do that, I do have to welcome my friend and co-host, Paul Krogdahl. So Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, as always. I think it's always the case. We're always good, right? Generally.
Yeah, generally. I guess we could add a little bit tired maybe to the equation due to all the events and stuff happening around us at the moment. But this is the time of the year with all the conferences and all the mad rush towards the end of the year, and it seems like everything is packing up at the same time. But yeah, it's part of the appeal of the industry, right?
It is indeed, yes. And we all do quite enjoy the mingling and making new connections, etc. at conferences. So we shouldn't complain about it, even though we do get quite fatigued out of the traveling and networking and everything else that happens. But I prefer that over the last 2 years we've had of lockdown and hide into rooms and virtual conferences, and it just doesn't work for me. I'm a touchy-feely person.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember last year, this time I was doing like two conferences on WebEx or video conferences per day. And I much prefer it this way. I do maybe 1 or 2 per week and actually be there present physically. But enough about that. First, actually, I do have to mention one thing. It's been a crazy week in the cryptocurrency scene. We're recording this on the 11th of November, and we're looking forward to talking about all of those things in the near future, because again there's a lot of craziness happening in the crypto space at the moment. However, because it's all moving so fast, we're not going to talk about any of that today. We have another interesting topic, but again, I do promise that we will pick up this crypto craziness as well in future episodes as soon as things settle down a little bit. But with that being said, let's get on with the topic of the day and our great guest that we are happy to welcome to our podcast. So, Jeff, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Ville. How are you?
I am really good, as you heard, a little bit tired, but I think we will manage. But Jeff, why don't you start by telling our audience who you are, what you do, and what are we going to talk about today?
Sure, no problem. And I guess before I do that, I can definitely resonate with the comments around the conference. I was in Vegas last week. I've got another conference next week. It does seem to be crazy time. But yeah, my name's Jeff Parker. I'm the managing director for the international business at Marqeta. I joined Marqeta a couple of months ago, and prior to that was in various other payments business as the COO at an international business called OFX, based out in Australia. And then after that, I moved to a similar business in payments called World First. I was a CEO there, and then we got acquired by the Ant Group, the Chinese owners of the Alipay app. So I kind of did a bit of traveling, was in Australia and Hong Kong, and then moved back to the UK during COVID. So at Marqeta, I'm responsible for leading everything outside of the US. We see a huge opportunity for growth in that area. So yeah, super excited to be on board and in the team, and thanks for having me today.
No, thank you for being here. I mean, Marqeta is one of those names you hear a lot in this space, and I'm really looking forward to having a discussion about what you guys do and what are the kind of interesting trends around your business. But before we get to all of that goodness, we do have a tradition in the podcast where we ask our guests to tell a joke. And as our listeners will know, I usually do it in the beginning. Paul does it in the end. But now that it's my time to host, I'm going to ask Jeff, do you have a joke for our audience today?
I have what you could try and say is a joke, but let's see how the audience.
That's the usual thing we have, right?
So here goes. How do you eat a Bitcoin?
Tell me.
With a megabyte. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, you got the actual level of perfectly right. So exactly right for the podcast. So I did enjoy that.
I was actually going to say, I mean, based upon what you said at the beginning there, Ville, around some interesting activities that's happening around the crypto space at the moment. Maybe you need to check whether the Bitcoin is rancid before you taste it, right?
Or indeed, if it's smaller than you thought. So
exactly.
Yeah. So again, So we're kind of foreshadowing the crypto conversation.
Set the bar low.
Yeah, but again, I mean, the crypto space is moving so fast. As we're recording today, 2 weeks from now, we could be in a completely different situation. So it's just that crazy right now. Yeah. But let's get off that side path for a second and then get to the topic of today. And I think the logical point to start here is that maybe, Jeff, if you can tell our audience a little bit, what is Marqeta? What do you do? And why do you do it today?
Sure. So Marqeta is a US headquartered fintech firm based out of Oakland in California. It was the first modern card issuer processor to exist, kind of replacing the legacy processing capability that existed, and really kind of defined a new category segment. Effectively, cloud native, API first company, working with some of the biggest and brightest tech enabled companies in the world. And really, the purpose of the company is to allow our customers to build and manage card programs, so debit card, prepaid card programs, really easily and quickly, reducing the complexity that other traditional payment processors bring. So we've got great clients: Uber, Block, Instacart, DoorDash, whole range of kind of some of those world-leading technology companies.
Are you doing the full card processing, so card issuing as well, etc.?
So it's a great question, actually. So the core business is issuing and processing, so virtual cards, physical cards, tokenized cards into wallets, and all the processing around that, connecting to the schemes and the merchants, etc. In the US, we do a full program management service, so we kind of do a one-stop shop for all of our customers, managing all their relationships with the schemes and the disputes and fraud management, etc. In the international world, which is where I am, we typically focus more on what we call a powered by model, which is really just providing a tech solution to our clients. We see that they're really tech enabled and can kind of build the experiences that they want for their customers using kind of our APIs.
So you're seeing potentially more growth in the sort of embedded finance space going forwards?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think historically our clients have been digital banks, fintechs, neobanks. But yeah, we see a huge opportunity going forward in the embedded finance space. We've been involved in that space for a number of years in some of the similar solutions, but I think increasingly over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of kind of corporates just want to embed payments experience and broader.
Okay, there was a bit of a lag on my side on the connection. I hope that didn't make it to the recording.
No, it's across the board. I think we've almost lost Jeff. Are you back with us, Jeff?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think,
Yes.
yeah, now it's better. So sorry to the listeners, sorry about that. I hope the connection is more stable moving forward. But I think I got what you said, Jeff, right there. And let me follow up with a usual question that we have when we talk about interesting companies in the fintech space, which is, of course, so what sets Marqeta apart from other similar companies? Because the reference list you have is quite recognizable by a lot of people, especially in the fintech space. I mean, Uber and Block, I guess, which is branded Square still in many places. So what is the reason why all these companies are using you instead of something else?
Yeah, is it good? I mean, I think, as I said, we were the kind of the segment defining. So we were the very first kind of in our space that led with being cloud native and API first. So we really enabled developers to kind of build really unique experiences on the top of our platform. So I think that's kind of initially what set us apart. I think our customer service we think is industry leading. So while kind of developers can do what they want on top of our APIs, we really do help them through that process. So if they haven't got experience in the industry, that really, I think, sets us apart. And then finally, I think it's just a scale that we operate. I think there's a lot of newcomers that have come into our space, but last year we processed over $150 billion of transactions for our customers, and there's no one that has that modern technology stack, that capability, and can have the credibility to operate at that scale that we do. So I think a combination of those three things is what really attracts people to us. Yeah,
I mean, that ticks all the boxes for me, at least. So it makes a lot of sense. And indeed, impressive volumes that you have, your processing and especially on the customers that you have, it makes a lot of sense in terms of figures as well. Now, this actually is touching on the topic that we would like to have as almost like the main theme of today, which is the fact that you're operating in an international space. So you are the head of director for international for Marqeta. That means that you also have business outside the US. So you're not only a US company, you have global customer base, and you're basically solving these card processing problems for your customers globally. Now, this brings an international element, which is interesting, especially from a data and ecosystem perspective and regulation perspective. Now, you're the head of international, and you are scaling this Marqeta platform globally. So what keeps you up at night? Is it regulation? Is it the supervision, your partnerships ecosystem, or what's the main thing you worry about when working on international expansion?
All of the above. No, I mean, I think what keeps me up at night most. I mean, the first thing that keeps me up. I've got two young kids, 4, 6, and a third on the way in about 2 weeks' time. So I think that's going to keep me up the most out of anything. But I think you're right from a work perspective. We are certified to operate in 39 different countries. We've got an ecosystem of partners, and as I said, we're maniacally focused at Marqeta on our customers and really serving those customers well, delighting them, exceeding their expectations. And as I said, with that volume of transactions that we're processing for them, and that partner ecosystem that we're managing, just making sure that we don't disappoint those customers is kind of the first thing that kind of keeps us up. And we take that trust that customers have placed in us extremely seriously. We're often, if not the main part of a client's business, definitely a key component of their offering to their customers. And so it's critical that they can rely on us. So just that as a main, I think, is one of the key things. Outside of that, I think, to your point, we're trying to scale the business outside of the US. We think there's a huge opportunity. And I think Marqeta is a hyper-growth company, and it's gone through successive growth over the last 10 years. And I think there's a danger when that happens in a company that you get complacent, you lose some of your ambition. We listed last year, and so really my job is to really keep all of the team inspired and focused and aligned on what we can do and really take advantage of the opportunity we have. I think we're really fortunate at Marqeta that the opportunity isn't what's in question. We've got a great product market fit. We're a tiny portion of a huge addressable market. And so it's really about how do we execute effectively to deliver on kind of that opportunity. I think that's what keeps me up, like, making sure that we deliver on our promises and deliver all of our stakeholders, employees, customers, what they deserve.
So I'm going to ask a bit of maybe a weird question, because I want to take a step back on this topic of basically providing financial services on a global scale. And let's start from the very basic question. If I start a fintech, let's say in US, and I get customers in the US and I scale in the US like you have done, and then I would like to basically go global, and I want to offer my same services, my same financial services that I'm already in production with in the US. Why can't I just turn it on and have it available globally, like basically turning on a switch or opening up a firewall? What are the obstacles for scaling outside your home country, especially in your case, for example, US? So what is the reason I'm not able to, as a US entity, launch a financial services company, let's say in Finland?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. Marqeta sits kind of in straddles some of the issues that we're going to kind of talk about here. So obviously, to provide financial services requires regulators. It's a regulated activity to move money. And so different countries have different regulatory bodies and different requirements around KYC, KYB, kind of identifying those, how you monitor those transactions, the level of risk that you have to do, the data that you have to give. And that regulation changes quite significantly by country. So if you want to be involved in financial services, some partner in that ecosystem has to be regulated. And so that's the first challenge. So if you are the regulated entity, then that takes a timely process. You need people, you need certain controls and processes, you need to be audited, etc. And that's obviously the key, predominantly the main challenge. Interestingly, for a company like Marqeta, and depending on the approach you take, is that Marqeta is a technology provider as opposed to a licensed kind of financial services provider. So actually, we're providing technology and working with some of those licensed parties. So our platform, one of the unique things about our platform is actually that being certified in 39 countries, we can actually do exactly what you said. We actually can switch on and allow our customers to literally move countries, within a couple of weeks. They can be in multiple different markets. But the underlying kind of partnership of services that are required, it's much more challenging. And so it can be many months really to move. In Europe, for example, depending on what you need, it can be 6, 9, 12 months to get certified by a scheme. You might need to sign up a bank or issue a bank or a BIN sponsor, and you have to go through a whole due diligence process with them. Outside of cards, you might want to be a money transfer provider in Finland or in mainland Europe. You have to get regulated by whether it's the Netherlands or there's various kind of places that you can go to passport your license. So I think when you think about all of those components together, the complexity is quite large and requires a level of consideration before you commit to expanding into multiple countries.
Yeah, I think a lot of these things rhyme quite well, because in our podcast we've had a lot of guests talking about how do you actually launch services in different countries, and I think the common theme that we hear all the time is that you need an anchor to the local ecosystem, whether that those anchors typically are part of the legal system, therefore also regulated. And we did talk about crypto a little bit there in the beginning, and it seems like many of these crypto companies are perhaps missing the point that you need that licensed regulated entity connected to the legal system in order to be compliant and able to offer services. So yeah, it does seem to make a lot of sense. So Paul, what do you think? I mean, is this the same answer we've been hearing with other guests as well?
It's absolutely the same. Yeah. I mean, we live in a highly regulated industry. We operate in a highly regulated industry. Regulations are not global at the moment still, although, we've had guests like Brett King coming on talking about moving towards a world of global regulation rather than local regulation. So absolutely. And like you said, Jeff, it's not just regional, it's country based. There's variations that are country by country. But one of the things that I also find very interesting, and I think we're going to go into that in a lot more detail, is around data residency and the management of data, GDPR, and particularly as you start moving across regulatory boundaries, how you deal with the differentiation of regulations against the management and control and security of customer data. So from Marqeta's perspective, or maybe Jeff, from your experience, I mean, how do we deal with ownership of data and customer data going forwards?
Yeah, I think I think back to your point around global regulation. I think it's a nice idea, but I think it's probably unlikely to happen in the near term. I think even with COVID in the last few years, we've seen in times of challenge to countries, I think countries kind of tend to retreat and look after themselves more. And I think that's the same approach with regulation. I think it's potentially it's likely to get tighter and more individualized than it is centralized in the short term. And obviously the UK leaving Europe with Brexit didn't help with that aspiration either. So you're right. I think data is one of the key things which make that kind of international expansion challenging as well. Yeah. I think from Marqeta's perspective, we do a couple of things. So one, we work very closely with our customers to understand what regulations they're kind of bounded by and monitored by, and we make sure that we understand that we work together to provide them with the tools and systems and security around that data that they need to satisfy their own kind of regulatory obligations, but also their own internal. In terms of GDPR, I think we've always taken the approach that we're effectively the custodians of our customers' data, and so we've architected our platform in a way that is very configurable and consistent with security laws and data standards as they stand. And I think the fact that we are kind of cloud native and modularized and API first, I think gives us industry leading level of kind of flexibility to be able to adapt and to changes that to that data requirements as we go forward. But I think what we always try and do as well is think beyond, I guess, the immediate. For example, a lot of our European customers, while they're not necessarily required by regulation to host data locally within Europe, a lot of them feel more comfortable if their data is stored locally. And so we've just opened a European version of our kind of cloud-based data center in Europe to give that level of satisfaction for customers that need it. So I think it's always just constantly having dialogue with customers. What do they want? What's important to them? And making sure we think about that as a core part of the service that we provide.
I actually think in most of the discussions that I'm having around with fintechs and banks around data, it's becoming more and more focused on where data is hosted from a country specific element. Some regulators are starting to say that they would like to see data domiciled in the country where the client is based, which means that even though you're running a cloud native infrastructure, you're still focused on saying, well, if we're operating for a bank or a financial institution in Norway, the client data for Norwegian customers must still be domiciled in Norway. Is this something that's starting to impact on you guys?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are certain geographies where it is mandated in terms of where that kind of data is held, and I think that will increasingly be the case. That was kind of one of the reasons that we took that decision to kind of set up this European data center. I think in Asia, we're starting to see similar requirements. Australia is quite strong on that, and sometimes it's mandated, sometimes it's just encouraged. I think it also depends on the size and the type of business that you're working with. So definitely, I think when you go into the more of the larger financial institutions, they have much kind of stricter guidelines, even if it's internal as opposed to regulatory. But yeah, I expect that trend to change. And I think the other really interesting piece on that is, I think, obviously, if you're trying to globalize and if you're doing cross-border trade, it's not quite as simple as saying that your customer is in Europe, because the buyer may be in Europe, but the seller may be in the US. So then we have to start thinking about data transfer and the different regulations in both of those geographies. And so that adds a layer of complexity. I think we're still at the beginning of this journey. But having said that, customer data is clearly critical and sensitive. And so I think at Marqeta, we're happy to make sure that we are as secure as possible. We recognize that is super important, but it does add some complexity to what we're doing.
You actually made an interesting distinction there that I'd like to dive into a little bit further. So from your perspective, that there is a difference in how we view customer data based upon whether it's data at rest or data in transit.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, we and I think this has probably been the progression of technology over time as well. I mean, I think again, we typically encrypt all of our data, whether it's at rest or in transit. But I think different organisations with different level of maturity are probably at different stages of that journey. But yeah, I think regulation and guidelines around that level of security will increase, and I think ultimately it needs to be encrypted at all times, because it's obviously more at risk when it's in transit, but in theory it's at risk at any time.
So we're techies, right? It's called Fintech Daydreaming, after all, our podcast here. And we like to put names on things. If it's an acronym, of course, it's better, because we like acronyms as well. One of the acronyms that was already mentioned here with regards to data privacy is, of course, GDPR, which is everybody knows it. Everybody has been talking about it forever. But there's a lot of topics you mentioned there about managing data and complying to regulations. What are the other headline topics in addition to GDPR in terms of regulatory schemes, otherwise, or guidances or otherwise, that our listeners could get familiarized? I mean, what are the relevant headline topics in this space today?
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically around that data in transit, as you mentioned there. I think Schrems 2, which is not necessarily kind of related to GDPR. So for those of you not familiar, I'll try and get this right. I think there was a privacy activist who sued Facebook around whether the transfer of data from Europe to the US kind of met GDPR regulations. And I think it was proved that maybe that transfer didn't. So there was a tightening of some of the GDPR guidelines. So I think those types of kind of incidents, kind of legal lawsuits, etc., can influence how we think about data transferring quite significantly. And then I think within some of those guidelines, there's lots of subtopics which I think you touched on earlier, Ville, around data residency or localization or regionalization. I think they all have quite significant impacts on how we think about data, and it's not just the transfer of data which is interesting. It's also, obviously, we're using data to create customer experiences and make sure that my view is that in the future, with the amount of data we have, we should be able to hyper-personalize customer experiences, and to do that we need data to be able to do that. So I think you get into an interesting realm there of how do you satisfy the regulatory requirements about data, but we also create user experiences which are seamless and frictionless, and that's based on I guess the data that we can analyze and use to hopefully add value to customers' lives.
Yeah. There's almost a dichotomy in all of this, right?
Yeah.
There is a, you need to give to get. We all want hyper personalized experiences. We all want to get that, focus on me, but at the same time we don't want to give any of our data to be able to have the fintechs and the providers create that personalization. So to a certain degree, the aspirations of the individuals are being quashed by their fear of sharing their data and the regulations saying we cannot utilize that data in a good way. So how do you think that Marqeta and the industry is going to react to this going forwards?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, on a non-Marqeta view, my own personal opinion is that I think people will get more comfortable with sharing data if they trust how that data is used and stored, and that they're confident that it actually adds value to their lives. I think despite all the technology advancements that we've had in the last 10 years, to me, that level of personalization still feels like spam at the moment. It's almost gone like, it's almost like become dangerous before it gets better. And I think that's where people are uncomfortable with that. I think it shouldn't be long until we can take it to that next level where people see real value. So I think companies like Marqeta, I think to your point, I think that dichotomy is a great word. I think we will continue to focus 100% on increasing the level of security and trust that we have with our customers around how we treat that data. But in parallel, I think we need to focus really, really hard on how do we kind of almost bring that data back together, or create, a digitalized token of an individual and their identity, so that we can then create these kind of really super cool experiences. And I think we talked earlier, we touched on embedded finance. I think the combination of powerful data, embedded finance into kind of retail or other experiences, the opportunities there are, for me, super exciting in terms of what that delivers for you as an individual. But what we can't do, and I think maybe there's been a gap in, we can't lose sight of the importance of the security of that data, and that has to be the number one priority above everything else. And once we need to build on top of that foundation. We can't ever forget that foundation, if that makes sense.
So speaking of the dimension of local versus global, GDPR, for example, as a data privacy regulation, basically had almost like the unintended consequence of favoring global companies instead of local ones, because global companies had easier time complying to GDPR regulation rather than the smaller ones. You mentioned now Schrems 2, all the data localization and basically having data residency in local countries moving forward. Do you see the trend changing? Is this going to favor more local players or global players?
Yeah, but it's a good point. I mean, and we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of crypto, but you also see, I guess, for some kind of industries that are less regulated, it kind of gives them the ability to be, I guess, more aggressive or in their approach to risk, to kind of take to take progress. So I think it will always be easier for global companies because it's harder for them to be regulated. If you're within a region and you're managed by a certain regulator and you've got a license by that regulator and your business is dependent on complying with that, I think you're much more likely to comply and to understand that. So I think there are always going to be, I guess, grey areas where people are pushing the boundaries and trying to go into new markets. So to me, that's always going to be a challenge. Hopefully, while I expressed that view earlier that I don't think we're ever going to come to a global view, hopefully collaboration between kind of markets and regulators continues to improve, so that there's kind of communication of bad actors and those types of things, so that we can manage that and not disadvantage the local players. But we've seen in e-commerce over the last few years significant discrepancies in terms of treatment between local players and global players, which are unintended consequences, I think, of some of the regulation. But it gave huge opportunities to Chinese merchants selling into Europe, disadvantage. They had significant advantages over the local players, which I think they've tried to fix now. So I think it's an ongoing battle that will continue to be fought. But as a general rule, I think it typically is harder for the local, given that kind of regulatory oversight.
I'd like to actually expand on that a little bit, on this notion of global versus local, and data residency, GDPR, etc. Another element that's strongly sort of tied into this is around customer data is identity management. And we are moving quickly, actually, I would say, into becoming global citizens. The idea that everything we do and transact is locally managed, locally done, very much like you said, right? You could have two people doing a transaction, one based in Europe, the other one based in the US. So now as we continue to provide this sort of global identity management, do you think there's a growing complexity in the relationship between identity management and data residency?
Yeah, yes. I think there is. I mean, back to your kind of dichotomy piece. I mean, I think to manage that data residency, localization, regionalization requirements, by definition, you have to segregate the data. Yeah. Yet, if we want to create a digital identity of someone, we need to kind of almost bring it back together to create that single view of the customer, to kind of create that complete digital identity, which I think has real value. And I think the potential of that, what you can do with that digital identity is quite big. It's still very early days, and I think people are working out what those use cases can be. But I think there's lots of potential there. So it kind of comes back to that. We try to architect our system that enables us to segregate that data, encrypt and tokenize kind of that data as we go along, and always be able to kind of present back kind of a tokenized view of a customer's identity to them. But I think we've seen over the last few years a proliferation of kind of people trying to look at digital identity and how we do that. And I still don't think anyone's got close to solving that. So I think it's probably one of the most interesting kind of spaces that we're operating in at the moment. If people can start to make huge progress in that, I think we'll see some quite exciting things. But again, I'd say it's probably early in that journey, but kind of huge potential.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that it's early days, because I mean it really shouldn't be early days.
Yeah, true.
Because I mean the whole digital identity question has existed for as long as KYC at least has existed. Yeah. So the problem has always been there, but nobody really has been able to crack it. And I mean you could even argue that the space is even more fragmented than it has ever been, because somebody always tries to solve something in some small area, and then it becomes a standard, and then everything goes even to a more fragmented direction. But we know, and we've been talking on the show before as well, about some interesting initiatives in trying to harmonize a digital identity space, at least in the European Union. But from your perspective, looking at the global landscape of digital identity from Marqeta's perspective, what are the most interesting digital identity initiatives or things happening right now from a global standpoint?
Yeah, well, I think if you take a step back to your point around it being so fragmented at the moment, I think that's a really it's a valid and true statement, and it shouldn't be the case. I guess if you think, why is that the case, or what would lead that to change? I think there's probably two things that typically get these things to be solved, and it's either regulation. It kind of gets it kind of forced on us, and I think that hasn't really kind of happened in many of the Western markets at this stage, or consumer products. Companies create consumer experiences that are just so much better than they were before, that it almost forces the adoption on it. And so, I think things like QR codes or digital wallets, went through a kind of period of being there but not really adopted, and then suddenly they kind of got a wave of we could actually create much better customer experiences from them. And so suddenly there's QR codes were ignored for 10 years, and then suddenly, or not in China obviously, but in Europe, and then suddenly in COVID everyone realized how great they were, and they've kind of suddenly kind of come to the fore again. So I think maybe that's what will happen with digital identity. In terms of what's really interesting there, I think blockchain is obviously something that could solve this, that whole kind of distributed ledger piece, and being able to create a real-time kind of digital identity. But again, it hasn't really kind of solved that problem yet. I think what's really interesting is obviously Apple acquired Credit Kudos last year, and obviously that access to open banking and some of the data that they're going to be able to get through that, given their experience and obviously track record with amazing customer experiences. You may see someone like Apple starting to make great strides forward, pulling that data together, using that to kind of create a digital identity, and then layering the customer experience on top. So that's probably, I guess, the area that I think we could see some movement over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think the whole notion of basically big techs like Apple moving into the identity space, I think that might be a big part of the strategy moving forward, and that's a really interesting dimension that we definitely need to get back to on the show in a later episode. But we are starting to round up the discussion here, but there's one more point that I wanted to get to, because this is something that I personally work with at the moment. And that is the notion of what we call privacy-enhancing technologies, or emerging privacy-enhancing technologies. And you can Google this, dear audience, if you don't know what this means, but it's secure multi-party computation, federated learning, or differential privacy. There's a lot of hype around these technologies, and they are really promising fantastic things when it comes to basically making sure that the customer data is always protected, but you get the benefits of machine learning with full regulatory compliance. I mean, this is almost too good to be true from a headline perspective, at least. But what do you think? I mean, from your perspective, should we believe this hype about these technologies, or is it just hot air?
I think there's typically hype when people see there's potential for certain technologies, but they're not really sure what to do with that technology and how to deliver the right experience. I think NFTs, we would say, were the next big thing until they weren't. And I think the multi-party computation piece is super interesting. You're starting to test my level of expertise here, but the concept of being able to break things up, and you're right, and pull data from multiple sources across multiple channels to your point, create those super personalized, I guess, experiences while being protected, is where we should be all aiming for. I mean, if you can start to create or leverage the true power of AI to deliver on that, I think we start to get into some really interesting propositions. I don't know, how that will evolve over the next few years, and I think maybe some of the things that are happening in crypto, for example, may kind of accelerate regulation on some of these areas sooner than we think. But I think fundamentally, if we can get to that centralized kind of identity proposition, that's where we should aim. And if that can deliver better consumer experiences, we should all be excited for what that potential looks like. But I think back to your initial point, I think it is hype at this stage, and it may be sometime before kind of that hype turns into a reality.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Let's see how many years it takes, or is it indeed just hot air? But I do like the idea of basically being able to have efficient machine learning and AI in regulated environments, just like the big techs are having in their own centralized data lakes. Because it feels a little bit unfair that the likes of GAFAs, of Googles and Facebooks of the world are able to mine from a massive data pool. And then there's in the financial services space, obviously there's a lot of regulation when it comes to data privacy. So you're not able to have as effective machine learning because of that. Now, maybe these technologies could solve part of that dilemma, but remains to be seen.
And AI is a whole nother podcast topic. I guess I'm sure we've explored, but the level of variance on AI, I guess at this stage again is another one. Huge potential. I think certain use cases are really starting to potentially deliver, but there's definitely a lot of hot air around that as well at this stage.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole season about just AI for sure. We try to drop in AI elements every now and then. So again, starting to round up here. So tell our listeners, what is next for Marqeta? Global expansion or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, definitely from my perspective, it's global expansion. I think, if I look at Marqeta as a company, we're in an amazing position. and most importantly, we've got, as we've said, some really A-class quality customers that love what we do, and they constantly tell us that they love what we do, and actually they want more from us, which is a great place to be. We're a fast-growing business. We're a hyper-growth business. We just had our earnings this week, and we continued that kind of really strong revenue growth in the business, and we have a very strong balance sheet. So I mean, we're in a good position to think about how do we invest and grow. In terms of what's next from the international side, I don't want to lose focus in what we do well. We want to double down on core issuing and processing. We still have less than 1% of the market. A huge runway for us to do there. And right at the start, as I mentioned, in Europe, we focus very much at the moment on providing a technology solution as opposed to a full program management service for our customers. So the first thing we're going to do is start to kind of expand those services in our international market, so we can provide that more holistic service for customers, and we'll do it in a modular, like a la carte menu type approach, so people can just kind of choose what they want from us. We want to kind of extend our services. I have a strong view, especially in Europe, but I think in other markets as well, that while fintech, interestingly, I think has started and been successful by breaking down a lot of the financial services components into small, narrow, niche pieces, and people are focused on those bits. I actually think we might, especially with embedded finance, start to go the other way and repackage those up and bundle those back up, and customers are wanting a one-stop shop. They don't want to have to go and negotiate with 10 different partners. They want to go to a single partner that can do all of their things. Now, whether that single person does them all themselves or they're just kind of working with a whole bunch of partners underneath, I think is to be seen. So we want to add credit to our existing capability, and we'll start to look at non-card capability, so account to account, international type payments, more into that kind of banking as a service. And last month in Money 2020, we announced Marqeta for banking in the US, which is an API for a similar kind of proposition. And then finally, the third lens for us is kind of geographic expansion. We want to do that very thoughtfully. We're certified in 39 countries. We think there's probably a few more that would really add value to our customer base and our proposition. And the fact that we have this single global platform that allows people to expand globally is one of the reasons that people come to us. So I think they're probably the three key areas of focus for us, which will hopefully keep us busy for the next few years.
Well, sounds like we might need you as a guest next year as well to hear updates on all the fantastic stuff that you guys are doing. So looking forward to that. But time flies when you're having fun is another saying that we have on the podcast. Paul, did you have anything you thought we missed in the conversation you wanted to ask?
Nothing that I think we missed in the conversation. And I'm going to take this opportunity, Ville. We've been sitting here talking about digital identity, talking about how you can use digital identity at a global scale, etc. And I'm still sitting here struggling, as you know, with physical identity between me here in Finland and my bank account in Sweden, and being able to prove that I am me back in Sweden now that I live in Finland. So, I would like us to fix just normal identity management before we start getting all excited about digital identity. But I know I can't stop the world just for me.
Unfortunately. Yes. But this is ongoing saga about your identity problems.
Oh, yes. This is going to go with me to my grave, right? Here is the man that struggled with identity management.
I think outside of identity management, you raised a good point. I think one of the next frontiers is going to be linking physical and digitally more seamlessly. I think there's been a huge focus on online and e-commerce, etc. People are now going back into physical, and those two worlds are still very disparate, and there is friction between those journeys. So I think maybe that's another topic, but I think there's definitely an area for advancement in that over the near future.
Yeah, I'd love to get connected with a fintech that wants to actually bridge that gap between digital identity, physical identity, because proving who you are in a digital world is one thing, but being able to prove that you are you in the physical world, particularly when you're in a different country outside of your home demographic, is actually not always that easy. I have learned.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and I think that the bridges between these physical identities and digital identities, they're analog today. So they are basically passport copies, and then you enter the information into databases, and then that becomes your digital identity. But there is no native digital identity that would carry over to the online world. And I think that's again, we're digressing here.
But there is the crux that I have actually learned very recently. Your passport proves that from a passport perspective you are you, but it doesn't prove that you are the representation of the identity that's being created for you in a different country at some point in time, because that's connected to a, you know, in the UK national insurance number, or in Sweden or Finland your person number. Now if you don't have any form of identification that connects you to that unique identifier number, you've got no way of proving that you are the same person with your passport to that identifier number in that country. And that's the issue that I'm having at the moment. Yes. Now, whether digital identity will help us to solve that, or whether digital identity will have the same problems, I don't know. Let's see where this future moves on, right?
All right.
Watch your space.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. I have a lot to say on that topic, by the way, but I'm gonna save our listeners kind of tangent here and leave it up to Jeff. Tell our audience, please, how can they get to know more about you, Marqeta, and how can they get in touch with you?
Thank you. So feel free to reach out to me on my email, jparker@marqeta.com, or visit our website, which is www.marqeta.com. I'll be very happy to speak to anyone that's interested.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for being a fantastic guest. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think we covered a lot of points and almost hit it off on a completely different tangent in the end, but I think that's a good segue perhaps to the next episode we're gonna have here. But dear listeners, that has been another episode of Fintech Daydreaming. As always, please subscribe if you haven't already. Write us a comment on the comment field, write us a review. Those are very important. And of course, if you want to do a 5-star review, that's fantastic. If you don't leave a review. As simple as that. Again, we do this for free without any sponsorship, so we are really relying on your reviews and subscriptions to keep the show running and have even more interesting and equally interesting guests as we have today with Jeff. So with that being said, we will see you in 2 weeks' time for another episode, and this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.